Aloha, my friends. Welcome back to the Surfer's Library. I'm Billy Jack, your guide through the pages of surf history, culture, and legend. Today, I'm finally sharing a book I got from my wife for Christmas, Windansea, Life, Death, Resurrection by our friend Chris Ahrens. Super stoked on this one. I'm going to read the intro, Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 for you. These chapters set up what you can expect more of in the rest of the book. The book is really great. I highly suggest picking up your own copy for your home library. Even if you're not a big reader, the pictures in this one are worth it on their own. So today we're dropping straight into one of the most mythic, beautiful, and volatile stretches of coastline in California, Windansea. It isn't just a wave, it's a crucible, a proving ground, a place where reputations were made, friendships were forged, and sometimes lives were lost. In these opening chapters, Ahrens lays down the foundation, not just of a surf break, but of a tribe. You'll hear about surfers like Woody Brown, who first challenged the break, Mike Hynson and Butch Van Aartsdalen, two surf legends whose presence helped cement Windansea's reputation during surfing's explosive cultural rise. The infamous Mac Meta Destruction Company, a renegade collective of surfers and free spirits who were as infamous for their antics off the water as they were respected for their commitment to surf culture itself. All this and much more. The book goes deep. It digs into the weight of localism, the intensity of belonging, and the importance of friendships forged through shared risk, loyalty, and surviving intense moments together. So settle in, picture the famous shack and the sandstone cliffs glowing in the sunset, the peak rifling down the reef, the lineup thick with tension and pride. And let's paddle out. Dedication. To my wife, Tracy, and to Chris O'Rourke, who once rescued me. Introduction. The unexplainable feeling. The swells will pass, and the great rides, the drops, the turns, and the wipeouts will all be gone. Less than a memory, almost a forgotten dream. You won't know they really happened at all, but you'll never forget the friends you did it all with. Maybe they were the best you'll ever have. When it's all said and done, perhaps the central experience in surfing is friendship. Big Wednesday director, John Milius. In the early 1960s, surfing formed a bridge between beatniks and hippies. While equally significant culturally as the aforementioned groups, surfing continues to be viewed by most merely as a sport, suspended like a second shoe that never drops. Yet surfing, as anyone who has been at it a while knows, is more than a sport. The word lifestyle comes closer but still falls flat. The surf brand Billabong probably came closest to nailing it with their tagline, "Only a surfer knows the feeling." I wish I'd had those words in my arsenal in 1962 while attempting to explain riding my first waves to my mother. She looked at me sympathetically, like when I came home with a black eye. "You know you tried, Mom, but you did not and could not know the feeling." However, you or anyone could have comprehended the beat that moved me and many other surfers simply by cranking up Miserlou all the way on an ancient hi-fi. In the 1950s, surfers benefited from their association with beatniks. While some visiting Hawaiians had already jump-started the process, the beats pushed California surfers the rest of the way to non-materialism, while contributing to a language born of carnal knowledge between beat poetry and pidgin English. Surfers, as participants in an American youth movement, and their evil twin Hodads, think Grease the movie, exited the womb nearly simultaneously. Like Hodads, surfers were first presented to the general public cinematically. For this, we can thank or blame the movie Gidget. While both films explore and exploit the shallow ends of youth culture, surfing was eventually redeemed through Bruce Brown's masterpiece, The Endless Summer. In it, Brown hints that surfing in its purest form has nothing to do with points assigned for waves ridden. Being an avid surfer, he knew that surfers grooved to their own soundtrack, dress code, and a language including repurposed words like stoked and bitchin'. This and other cryptic verbiage were required to explain the unexplainable feeling while doubling as a code to keep parents, teachers, and law enforcement off the scent. Due in part to the language barrier, My father never knew the extent of my delinquency. Chugging bottles of stolen Red Mountain wine beneath high school bleachers, smoking gutter-rescued cigarette butts with magna cum laude graduates from juvenile hall, and brawling with anyone who threatened to stop us. More likely, Dad knew what I was doing and figured it was all part of growing up. After all, he had once been a pretty wild kid himself. Iron men and wooden boards. Dad was a Santa Monica Pier local during what he called California's golden years, something most Americans referred to less glamorously as the Great Depression. By nature, Dad was a gentleman. Still, tough times hardened him until he was as resilient as the wooden pier pilings built to withstand even the fiercest waves. A boxing fan, he repeatedly said, "The great fighters are desperate, and being desperate is what makes them great." Desperate to him meant hungry. When Dad and his best friend Harold got hungry, Harold would challenge another tough guy to a bare-knuckled punch-out in the sand for $5. According to Dad, Harold beat everyone, including Hammer and Hank Armstrong, who became middleweight boxing champion of the world in 1938. After a couple wins, they had enough dough to enter the Coconut Grove to see Harry James blast jazz out the end of his horn. Good times rolled until Harold knocked some big mouth clean over a cocktail table, and he and Dad were kicked out. Nothing like prohibition to make a semi-teetotaler crave a drink. Not out of desperation, but for fun, the pair would swim out to one of the party boats anchored 3 miles offshore, where they legally indulged in adult beverages. The stunned and drunk patrons welcomed Dad and Harold aboard before buying them a nip or two. They slammed shots, kissed the girls goodbye, and plunged back into the icy black water, laughing while swimming home. Dad and Harold were long-distance swimmers, body surfers, and on occasion, surfers who borrowed wooden surfboards from one of the Curren brothers, who were among the few surfers in Santa Monica at the time. But I enjoyed Dad's fight stories more than his surf stories. Surfing in his time was dangerous, done by musclemen on 100-pound wooden planks. I chose safer activities like yo-yos and marbles. I put away childish things in the summer of 1959, hours after my neighbor Robert Vermont and I returned from seeing Gidget, every inch of her, at Montebello's Garmar Theater. Those 95 minutes viewing Sandra Diaz Gidget and Mickey Munoz, who knew this top competitive male surfer was Dee's stunt double disguised in a wig and bikini, delivered a 1-2 punch I never recovered from. It apparently had a similar effect on Robert, who, after racing me home, decided to build us surfboards. At Robert's suggestion, I tore the tracks from my plywood base of my HO railroad set. He then hand-sawed the wooden sheet in two, painted each half yellow, and presented me with my first surfboard. That weekend, we discovered that Huntington Cliffs was not Malibu. Robert was not Sandra Dee. I was not Mickey Munoz, and these were not real surfboards. Without necessary buoyancy, they sank as we attempted paddling them. We soon found, however, they worked fine as skimboards. Skimboarding kept us sliding surfer style over wet sand until 3 years later when I traded 45 of my paper route dollars for a used, handmade, Wardy surfboard. By the early 1960s, it didn't matter if you rode waves or not. You could be a surfer simply by bleaching your hair and adopting one of two uniforms: a Pendleton or Madras plaid shirt, white Levi's and Converse tennis shoes, or a t-shirt of any color, faded Levi's, Army surplus boots, and Army jacket. Being poor forced me into the pre-punk jack boots and Army jacket. Musically, most parents were locked into the post-war big band groove and, therefore, never understood the surf beat of the Ventures, the Shantays, or King of the Surf Guitar, Dick Dale. On November 21st, 1962, my sister Jackie brought a forbidden record album, Surfer's Choice by Dick Dale and his Deltones, into a house that had never before witnessed anything more provocative than Frank Sinatra. Our parents weren't home, so Jackie freely placed the record onto the refrigerator-sized wooden hi-fi and cranked it up loud. The current from the speakers bypassed my brain and drove an electrified spike into my heart. Jackie taught me something called the surfer stomp, which was done to surf music, a genre ruled by the man on the stereo, Dick Dale. Every day after school from then on, I turned on Surfer's Choice while doing the stomp or crouching to imitate Dale's surfing stance from the only surf photo I'd ever seen, the one of him on his album cover. King of the Surf Guitar. "Who's the best surfer in the world?" a friend once asked me. "Dick Dale," I responded as he laughed in my face. I soon learned that Dale did surf, but that he wasn't particularly good at it. Turns out he was something more. He had developed a sound that perfectly matched the thrill of riding a wave. To my knowledge, he was the first to describe the unexplainable feeling without words. I wore out Surfer's Choice on that family hi-fi while in my teens, but I only saw him perform live once at that time. I was 14 when I attended a surfer stomp he played in Anaheim's Harmony Park. It would be another 20 years before I met the man. Chris O'Rourke was living and dying in Encinitas when some friends and I organized a fundraiser for him at the La Paloma Theater. The theater's owner generously donated the facility, radio stations promoted the event, and a few hundred tickets were sold for $7.50 each. While some good local talent gave it their all, we needed a solid headliner. After world surfing champion Peter Townend gave me Dale's phone number, I cold called him. He answered the phone himself and listened patiently as I, a stranger to him, nervously explained how one of California's best surfers was fighting for his life. The king heard me out before asking the date of the concert. When I told him, he paused before saying that his wife was having surgery that day and he needed to be at her side. He hoped I would understand that he couldn't make it. I thanked him and hung up the phone. Less than an hour later, Dale called back to say his wife had rescheduled her surgery to accommodate O'Rourke's benefit and that she, he, and the entire band would play the La Paloma at the requested date for free. I can still recall the power and the passion in his voice as he said, "Any surfer who won't spend $7.50 to help this kid isn't worth the wax he stands on." Dick Dale and his band rocked the La Paloma as hard as it ever has been. After the concert, I introduced myself backstage. He said he hoped he had helped the cause before disappearing into the night like the superhero he was to me. I would have done better imitating the King's radical new musical style than his elementary surfing. That photo of him riding a wave was, in essence, a YouTube tutorial for me, and I spent my first year of surfing frozen in a Dick Dale squat. Any ride's a good ride. The Wardy rode well. I did not. I was what they called a kook, a Hawaiian adaptation of a word meaning feces, which politely translates to beginner. While no person should be called feces, being called a beginner was nearly as bad. Weekends found us huddled by the side of the road, sitting ducks naively jumping into strangers' cars. One man had the door handles and window cranks on the passenger side of his car removed. Our only escape was through the massive wedge of flab blocking the exit. He spoke of pulling down the pants of naughty young boys and spanking them until they bled and cried for their mamas. I had never before heard such talk, but somehow knew it was evil. It would be weeks until a fisherman alerted our parents of the rotting corpses found amid the seaweed. I believe we were spared only because of my hitchhiking partner and best friend, Chicky. Chicky's silky long blonde hair hung over one eye, making him as cute as any girl. He was funny as hell, mouthy, aggressive, and street smart. He had been to juvie for hanging a BA, bare ass, out a car window. Whenever we sat between rides, he passed around his dime store corncob pipe filled with the tobacco of discarded cigarette butts. Chicky never took crap from anyone, especially from some old man making a play for him. In juvie, he had become a good poker player and a fearless fighter. He told the driver he could spank him in the beach bathroom if he wanted. The man had the look of a rabid dog when he pulled over near the beach. Walking around the car, he set me free. When he took Chicky by the hand, he, Chicky, pushed him away. I swore at the man, who looked small and sad as he stuffed himself back into his car, fleeing like a rat would a baseball bat. Chicky kicked a dent into the car fender as we flipped the man off, and he peeled out. Once we arrived at Huntington Pier, we body surfed before playing cards for nickels, dimes, or the cigarettes stolen from a Cahunk's purse. Nobody ever knew Cahunk's real name, but she was one of us. She was a nice girl, the sad side of pretty and overweight, as her name implies. We cared deeply for Kahunk, but showed affection to her like we did everyone we loved in those days, by saying something mean. I'm genuinely sorry, Kahunk. Another way of getting money was for our friend, Big Ben, to lift a not-so-pretty girl from her towel, run her to the water, and throw her in. Ben was handsome and most girls enjoyed the ride, laughing as he did his flirty, dirty magic, and one of us raided her purse for cigarettes and change. We rode borrowed surfboards near the pier, avoiding the lines fishermen cast at us whenever we got too close to them. An even bigger reason for eluding the pier was that hitting it could break your surfboard. Good surfers shot the pier, skillfully riding through the barnacle-encrusted cement pilings and emerging victoriously on the other side like a bullfighter. I was not a good surfer. Besides surfing and cards, our greatest entertainment was hassling Preacher, the old man, all in black, who stood and delivered day after day beneath the pier's ominous shadow. Chicky would kneel behind him, I would bump him, and he would fall into the sand, stand again, dust himself off, and keep preaching. Everyone laughed until some guy punched me in the mouth and said, "You think you're tough picking on an old man? Pick on me." Preacher calmed my assailant and lifted me gently from the sand. I glanced into his compassionate eyes, then quickly turned away. He never quit trying to reach us with words that only then began penetrating my dead heart. That night at home in bed, I wondered if Preacher was right. I never hassled him again, and I was glad I wasn't there when Chicky lit his pants on fire. Chapter 1. Windansea is in the eye of the beholder. Like all natural wonders, Windansea packs an emotional wallop. Thousands of years of tribal joy and sadness, along with the great rides and wipeouts of Butch, both Woodies, Simmons, and O'Rourke, can still be felt there. Windansea is located at the edge of a resort town in Southern California called La Jolla. Some say La Jolla is Spanish for the jewel, although Joya, not Jolla, is the correct spelling for jewel in Spanish. The first known settlers in the area, the Kumeyaay, called the place Kulohoy, land of holes. That may seem appropriate to the surfers run out of Windansea by the locals. In all fairness, land of holes probably refers to the area's many caves, not its most vigilant residents. La Jolla, as it's known internationally, is a jewel with many caves and an occasional a-hole. Thousands of years before the tourists arrived and the coastal mansions were built, the Kumeyaay inhabited the entire region. Things changed little for the tribe until the Spanish invasion of Alta California in 1769. Those not driven deep into the mountains were sent to work in Mission San Diego, which they destroyed after killing a local padre there in 1775. Continuing through the Mexican period, beginning in 1826 and into the early 1900s, the Kumeyaay were forced from their ancestral homes. Before that, their vast territory extended 120 miles from Oceanside, California to Ensenada, Baja. Half as deep as it was wide, the landmass reached inland over 60 miles, from the beaches of La Jolla to the Cuyamaca Mountains. When on the coast, these migratory people paddled their reed canoes out to gather seafood. On their return to shore, they no doubt rode waves. Were they not surfing? The Kumeyaay resembled Polynesians in this, their tulle skirts, shell necklaces, and feathered head coverings. As La Jolla's first surfers, they predate foam and fiberglass wave riders by a few thousand years. In 1887, the railroad opened La Jolla to land developers, hunters, fishers, tourists, dealers of opium, and cheap Chinese labor. They and other venture capitalists exploited this wilderness for profit while the Kumeyaay wondered who gave anyone the right to buy and sell the land. Few kids growing up in La Jolla knew any of this. They wanted to surf, party, and be left alone. Yet, without realizing it, they had migrated toward Kumeyaay roots, living somewhat tribally in opposition to an establishment that never attempted understanding them until true stories faded into myth. There is no record of Kumeyaay surfers paddling into the peak at Windansea, so I will leave that to your imagination. The following tales, however, are well documented. I have carefully researched them, and in some cases, I lived them. There is no life east of I-5. Popular 80s bumper sticker. Like everything in our culture, Windansea would eventually be tamed. It is now located on tourist maps and airport walls. Quaint bungalows have been replaced by sun-eclipsing stucco boxes. Nobody drives their car into the shorebreak or rides flexi flyers out of sewer pipes anymore. The shack, once considered an eyesore reserved for surf bums, is now a historical landmark visited by tourists snapping those "you won't believe what I did on my summer vacation" pictures. Random polling indicates that fewer than 5% of non-locals have heard of the Mac Meta Destruction Company, the fictitious company founded by Jack Mac McPherson and Bob Meta Rackstraw, ostensibly to keep Windansea sacred while having more fun than the law allows. Still, Windansea retains enough badass to get a tooth loosened for being on the right wave at the wrong time. Modern-day Windansea sometimes generates the melancholy felt when the house is full but the party is dying. While real fun still happens, the old days are often reenacted by dimly lit luau's and surf reunions, reminding us of an outlaw past. Some people have more affection for the Windansea parking lot, the lot, than exists in entire families. After estrangement from wealthy birth parents, many lot locals find cohesion with other lost souls gravitating to the ocean. The lot is where you check the surf and tell the stories. It serves as bleachers from which to observe the Main Break, the Womp, Big Rock, Middles, Simmons, and Dunemere. At first glance, Windansea waves appear as mushy peaks breaking near shore. Your first paddle out proves this wrong. The peak rises far from the sand and is quick and thick, unloading more water than nearly any other SoCal surf spot. While Windansea mimics a smaller version of one of the North Shore's premier spots, Sunset Beach, a few hundred yards south, Big Rock serves up a quarter-scale model of the pipeline in the shape of a punchy, locals-only razor reef. This partially explains why La Jolla surfers do so well in Hawaii. By the turn of the last century, approximately 350 mostly non-Native Americans occupied the region now called La Jolla Shores. 2 miles north of Windansea, but a surfing world apart, the Shores is what some consider, perhaps unfairly, the Windansea Nursery. Legendary surfers Woody Ekstrom, John Close, Dickie Moon, Tom Ortner, Margot Godfrey, Chris O'Rourke, and David Eggers were among those who used this usually gentle beach break as a launchpad to fame, the powerful reefs to the south and the thumping beach break called Blacks to the north. Gary Keating, Tony Staples, Bolton Colburn, Gary Goodrum, Tim Lynch, Henry Hester, Kurt Archie Letterman, Sandy Nilsson, and other Red Hots remained true to the Shores throughout their primes. Tourists once found shelter at a coastal hideaway called the Windansea Hotel. Built in 1909, this retreat stood in rustic dignity for 34 years before being destroyed by fire in 1943. Even with the hotel reduced to ashes, Windansea persisted as the name of the beach. While Windansea was unknown by most people early in the last century, La Jolla was a popular and romantic destination, holding as much charm and mystery as Fiji's Tavarua does for us today. Because of its distance from Hollywood, La Jolla never equaled Malibu's celebrity. However, it did catch the spotlight on occasion. Movie star Jackie Coogan was a regular in the surf. Doc Ricketts, the hero of Steinbeck's Cannery Row, collected biological specimens for his Pacific Biological Laboratory at Devil's Slide inside of La Jolla Cove. Noir author Raymond Chandler had a place near town. Gregory Peck grew up there, as did Cliff Robertson and Raquel Tejada, who attended La Jolla High School before reinventing herself as Raquel Welch. No one really knows which 20th century surfer first rode Windansea's glorious two-way peak, but most credit the brilliant Woody Brown with the maiden voyage in 1937. Brown was soon followed by surfing pioneers Don Oakey, Townsend Towney Cromwell, Bill Eisenhower, Dorian Paskowitz, Storm Surf Taylor, John Elwell, Bob Barber, Carl Knox, Lloyd Baker, Fred Kenyon Sr., Skeeter Malcolm, Woody Ekstrom, and very few others. Abandoning the American way of their forebears, creatures of blood and sand were recreated to be as different from the collared lemmings of the age as the lobsters and abalone they gathered freely from the adjacent reefs. A well-worn dirt path winds down a short bluff to a rocky beach where clean, large-grained sand squeaks beneath your feet and filters water that can change from gray to emerald green, gold, turquoise, and electric blue within hours. When the surf is flat and the water clear, a series of submerged reefs that give the waves their shape can be seen. Moss-covered sandstone coves provide refuge for teenage potheads and young lovers. Thick kelp forests are home to varieties of fish while keeping ocean chop in check. A sandy beach bordered by a molar-grinding shorebreak, perfect for body surfing, gently jogs for 3/10 of a mile to the south before abruptly ending at Big Rock. The jewel or the hole. Regardless of degradation over time, La Jolla remains a 7-mile miracle where the coast saber-tooths from Torrey Pines through Indian Bathtub, Blacks, La Jolla Shores, La Jolla Cove, the Children's Pool, a series of pocket beaches best left off the map, and Windansea. Practical names like Middles, Big Rock, and Little Point belie the creativity of those who ride waves there. The centerpiece of this wave garden is Windansea proper, which basically consists of 4 quarters: the outside rights, the inside rights known as right hooker, the outside lefts, and the inside lefts. Some argue that the aforementioned spots, along with Simmons, Dunamere, and the Wamp, are all part of Windansea. Maybe, but Mainbreak at the foot of Nautilus Street, where a palm frond shack indicates your arrival, is central on Surf's Up days. The shack is a landmark dedicated to liquid love and power, an emoji saying, "The best break in the area is out there." With no stores, restrooms, or restaurants nearby, this beach has little to recommend it to tourists. The locals like it that way, and why bother anyways? This is a frumpy bridesmaid compared to the blushing beauty of La Jolla Cove. And good luck finding a parking space. Now, if you win the Windansea lottery and are invited to stick around, you might notice something as ironic as it is unique. This is a family beach not fit for families. Do you really want your kids exposed to what happens here in the worst, or what some might call the best of times? The surf, which is dangerous to the uninitiated, is as strictly regulated by locals as is the lot. Many among the lot crew are excellent surfers, righteously doling out justice while hassling tourists and critiquing waves from their lofty perches on shore. Allowing Windansea to be an autonomous zone for partying surfers was never a serious consideration for city fathers, who viewed surfers as little more than water-soluble gangsters. Who among the town's rulers could know that the delinquents they arrested and the filthy shack they inhabited would one day be considered as relevant to surfing as Butch Cassidy and the hole in the wall are to the Wild West? And don't be fooled by Windansea's whitewashed new image. The place continues to be guarded by some old-school, vigilant locals, none of whom would have written the words decorating the San Diego airport walls, "Windansea, happiness is calling." While a happy place for some, be advised this place does not play well with others. There is a reason for that. Big crowds equal big problems. While being rich and famous opens the doors in most regions, it's often a liability here. American Vice President Spiro Agnew discovered that in the early 1970s, when he and his motorcade were viciously assaulted with water balloons from across the wall of what was then the beachfront home of the Berlasky family. The house, which faced directly into Windansea, is one reason the Berlasky kids, most notably Mark, became good surfers. Other non-locals were treated worse than Agnew. Flat tires, dog crap smeared on windshields, along with threatening notes that would now be considered hate speech, were once common. While Windansea surfers were sometimes regarded as dangerous, few punches, to my knowledge, were ever thrown without provocation. Longtime Windansea local Carl Ekstrom puts it this way: "They are generally nice people, just don't step on them." Beyond the shack, the next prominent inorganic structure on the beach is a storm drain that once doubled as a bobsled ride for the Macmeta Destruction Company. Here, gutter water transported surfers like Tiny Brain Thomas and Al Nelson to the shore along with animal waste and carrion. Surfers, some in Nazi uniforms, invaded the motherland to the thrill and horror of spectators. While this was certainly insensitive, there was nothing anti-Semitic in it. It was simply another way to give the world the finger while keeping boredom at low tide. Finally, there is the cement monolith that is the most famous sewage pumping station in the world. Not much of a title, I realize, but this La Jolla Pump House number 21 is the scene of author Tom Wolfe's greatest crime against language. You might know it as the Pump House Gang. More on Wolfe later. Some smart smash-and-grab developer has eyes on the few remaining mid-century one-story houses, dreaming, maybe praying for an earthquake or a bulldozer. The lots can then be split into matchboxes, where a half-dozen luxury high-rises bring him millions at the expense of we who are forced to endure such monstrous uniformity. Cumier Acres has a nice ring to it. The accidental tourist comes, sees, but never conquers. After being dismissed by the locals and getting a whiff of the sewage pipe in full bloom, they pivot back to their hotel room overlooking La Jolla Cove. Once on the street, they join the ranks of disconnected masses wearing the pavement of Prospect Street thin in search of somebody else's good time. Ironically, they will find the stench worse here in luxury's lap than they did at Windansea. Your first sniff indicates that the seals have reclaimed the children's pool for their own children. While representing a tiny fraction of the world's surfable coastline, without wind and sea board makers, surfing would not be where it is today. This who's who of innovators includes catamaran inventor Woody Brown, asymmetrical inventor Carl Ekstrom, downrail pioneer Mike Hynson, twin pin inventors Nick and Bear Mirandon, and glider pilot Skip Fry. Locals have first pick of equipment when the waves rise from offshore canyons, roll through the kelp beds, compress in narrow crevices, stand tall, and spill their guts in a display rarely observed anywhere within 100 miles. To them, this is more than a good wave. It is a sacred space with a tradition of goodness, badness, generosity, theft, love, music, hoots of joy and pain. Mac made a destruction company, not when the surf's up construction company. Over the line, overindulgence, blood and vomit in the sand. The dust of lifelong friends scattered at right hooker. Ghosts of hot curl. Black Butch standing triumphant over the world. Pat Curren, Wayne Land, Pal Al, Brewster, O'Rourke, and the Patterson brothers all paying and being paid silent tribute. Fallen comrades and heroes in the seaweed permeate the salt air like first kisses, first beer, first bong load. Hand-carved sandstone and spray-painted memorials. Killing Barnacle Bill. Fred Kenyon Jr. was a master of Tang Soo Do and the co-owner of the La Jolla surf shop Clean Line with John Barbo. Fred's father, Fred Sr., co-founded the original Windansea Surf Club, a tight gathering of locals who surfed and hosted luau's there. Both Fred Jr. and his father were men of action. The following snippet by fellow member of the original Windansea Club, Woody Ekstrom, illustrates that point. Fred Sr. came down to Windansea with one of the first hollow fiberglass surfboards. When my brother Bobby borrowed the board, he lost it and it hit a rock in the shore break called Barnacle Bill. Once Kenyon's new board broke and sank to the bottom, he was angry, more with Bill than Bobby. Later, Fred brought a jackhammer to the beach and ground Barnacle Bill to sand. Chapter 2. Being there. Windansea is intoxicated with the desire to get drunk and the hope to get sober. Marred by kelp flies, tourists, hodads, and progressively uglier buildings, the waves continue speaking for this paradoxical Eden. I was learning to surf and heard there were good waves in La Jolla when I convinced my father to drive me there from the flatlands of LA in 1962. While seeking the beach, we got lost in a suffocatingly thick eucalyptus forest long since mowed down by the University of California, San Diego, in favor of Khrushchev-era concrete blocks, generously called apartments. Such degradation was still only a nightmare in the minds of the literati when we broke through the woods and saw La Jolla shores bathed in sunshine, bordered to the south by the majestic cliffs of La Jolla Cove, and to the west by a sheet of blue glass stretching all the way to Hawaii. Once at the shores, I lumbered over crisp little waves, looking up occasionally to wonder at the sparsely populated hills and verdant cliffs occupied by nesting cormorants. Previously, such places existed only in dreams. I knew nothing of Windansea until several years later when legendary surfboard builder Dale Velzy clued me in. If Dick Dale was the king of the surf guitar, Velzy was the king of the surfboard. He was revered even by Windansea locals, who never revered anyone from out of town. Velzy spoke in his whiskey-strained voice as if Windansea were a cathedral. He only seemed to be half kidding when he said, "If the waves don't kill you, the locals probably will." After getting my driver's license in 1965, I drove around La Jolla trying to find the famous surf spot. After several dead ends, I spotted the shack, parked in the lot, and paddled out to find the rumors true. The 6-foot-plus waves wanted to drown me, and so, apparently, did those who rode them. When someone ordered me to split, I returned to my car to find a note on the windshield reading, "Go home." I knew better than to argue. Until the mid-1970s, many Windansea homes were leftover bungalows originally built for LA's weekending elite. Even amid the few beachfront mansions of that time, wealth was exposed for the facade it sometimes is. Billy Bergner and Wayne Land's Berlin surf shop employees occasionally displayed their disdain for the god of filthy lucre by burning their hard-earned cash, $20 at a time. They realized the next big chubasco, Mexican hurricane, swell would chop every mother's son down to equal size. While a few inferior surfers were allowed to surf Windansea unaccosted, perhaps grandfathered in after decades of hanging out, most had to be invited, as one famous surfer found out after being sent home with a harsh aloha. Before the 80s, a few $100 could rent a place in the second or third row of what now ranks among America's most exclusive neighborhoods. Nobody considered flipping the family home, starting a clothing line, or becoming an Instagram influencer. The only time I surfed Big Windansea was during the legendary Southwest swell of '75. Butch Van Artsdalen had moved to the islands after earning the title Mr. Pipeline, one blistering tube at a time. This left Hynson to represent the old guard, while new kids Close, Rouleau, and Ortner ripped and nipped at his heels. The swell had not yet peaked when Hynson faded me into the rocks while offering a lesson in the latest maneuver, side slipping, which is done by drifting sideways down a wave. While shoulder hopping, being cut off, by a surfer is considered an infraction of the unwritten rules, I was nearly honored to be hacked by the endless summer star. Debbie Melville, the only girl I recall in the lineup that day, held her own in the testosterone-infused peak and continued improving until becoming the 1982 Women's World Surfing Champion. By evening, the waves had jumped to a solid 8-foot with occasional 10-foot sets. I paddled directly into the peak, spun around, dropped in, drove to the bottom, and crack! Something hit me from behind. Turning around, I noticed a sunburned gremmy, young, obnoxious surfer, whom I figured was out of his depth. His hair was white, his face was streaked like war paint with zinc oxide. A wide-stretched, cracked, and blistered mouth screamed, "Go home, you corded kook!" The word corded referred to the surf leash I was wearing. Surf leashes had only recently been invented and were frowned upon by Windansea purists at the time. I understood the Gremmy's frustration with leashes because they kept inferior surfers attached to their boards. However, being called a kook, coupled with the ding the Gremmy put into my rail, pissed me off. I paddled toward him like a shark on the hunt, but he never flinched or broke eye contact. Attempting to bluff, I shouted, "I've been surfing here since you were in diapers." "Bullshit," the Gremmy snapped, lunging toward me. He then spun around and paddled back into the lineup, occasionally turning to flip me off as I followed closely like a dumb fish chasing a baited hook. He was a strong paddler for a Gremmy, however, and when I caught him at the peak, I was out of breath. 8-foot sets rolled beneath us as he smirked, flipped me off again, and moved aside. This left me facing local boys Marty Fitch and Root Swan. The plan was for them to back the Gremmy up and back me, the non-local, down. Fortunately, I knew both Root and Marty. Once they admonished the Gremmy, he smiled sheepishly, and we apologized simultaneously. I didn't know this Gremmy was Chris O'Rourke, and that I would be at his side as he lay dying less than a decade later. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks for spending a little time with me exploring another piece of surf history and culture. I hope you enjoyed the opening chapters of Windansea, Life, Death, Resurrection by Chris Ahren. I highly suggest picking up a copy for your own surf library. Make sure you call your local surf shop and see if they have a copy first. If not, Amazon's always got it. If you enjoyed this episode, it'd mean a lot to me if you shared the podcast with a friend who loves surfing, surf culture, or just a good story from the past. If you'd like to help support the podcast, you can do so by visiting buymeacoffee.com/The Surfer's Library. Your support helps cover the platform fees that help the show keep going each month. Also, if you'd like to sponsor the podcast or have any story ideas or feedback for the podcast, please contact us on Instagram or at thesurferslibrary@gmail.com. Until next time, thanks for tuning in, and as always, keep your toes on the nose, your stoke high, and always, always, always support your local surf shop. I'll see you out in the lineup. Chris Ahren is a prolific surf writer, storyteller, and ocean historian based in Southern California. He's been writing for surfing magazines for over 30 years, contributing to every major surfing publication in the world. Among his books are Good Things Love Water, Joyrides, Surf Stories, Volume 2, and Kalea's Gift, Surf Stories, all of which collect his essays, retold legends, and experiences from decades of surfing. His most recent book is Windansea, Life, Death, Resurrection, a 155-page tome chronicling the history, culture, and characters of the Windansea Reef Break in La Jolla from the 1930s through the 1980s. Ahrens also has experience beyond print. He was editor-in-chief of Risen magazine for 7 years, wrote and directed the documentary Dope, Death of Prison Eventually, and has co-written the memoirs of skateboarder Christian Hosoi. He lives in Cardiff by the Sea, California with his wife Tracy and their cats. Surfing in the ocean remains central to his life. To learn more, visit his website, paralandrapublishingcompany.com.